This is a story about Joseph and Mary, escaping the violent and ferocious King Herod, who had sent people to capture and kill baby Jesus. The desert night was colder than expected, the stars a blazing canopy above a land steeped in fear and unrest. Joseph's hand tightened around the reins as the donkey plodded forward, its hooves barely making a sound against the dry, cracked earth. Beside him, Mary clutched their infant son, wrapping him tighter in her arms to shield him from the night air, and perhaps from something far worse. A storm was brewing behind them, a storm that wore a crown and commanded legions. Bethlehem was no longer safe. Word had spread like wildfire through the town. King Herod, seated upon his precarious throne in Jerusalem, had grown paranoid, his hold on power slipping like grains of sand through his fingers. Rumors of a new king of the Jews had reached his ears, a child born under a blazing star destined to challenge his reign. Herod's paranoia was legendary, his cruelty feared. He had murdered his own sons, his wife, and countless others who he believed conspired against him. Now, a baby, an innocent child who would one day come to save his people, the true Messiah had become his target. Joseph urged the donkey to move faster, casting a nervous glance over his shoulder. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, and every gust of wind felt like the approach of danger. They were running for their lives and for the life of the child Mary held so close. The night before, an angel had come to Joseph in a dream. "Herod is searching for the child to kill him," the voice had warned. "Take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt." There had been no time to waste. They had left Bethlehem under the cover of darkness, their only protection the night and the vast desert that stretched ahead. Now every creak of the donkey's saddle, every distant footfall on the wind, felt like the approach of Herod's soldiers. In Jerusalem, the air was thick with tension. Herod the Great sat on his gilded throne, his mind racing. He had ruled this land with an iron fist for decades, appointed by Rome to keep the peace in his troubled province. Yet peace had never been part of Herod's rule. His kingdom was one of blood, intrigue, and paranoia. The whispers of a coming Messiah, a savior who would topple kings and liberate the people, had haunted him for years. But now the prophecies seemed to take shape. He had been deceived by the Magi, those foreign astrologers who had come seeking the child. They had spoken of a star, of a king born under its light, and Herod asking them to return to him with the child's location. But they had vanished, slipping away like thieves in the night. Herod's smile had twisted into a snarl. His eyes burned with fury as he barked his orders to the soldiers. "Find them! Find the boy and kill him! Kill them all!" In Bethlehem, the nightmare had begun. The stillness of the early morning was shattered by the clash of swords and the cries of mothers. Herod's soldiers moved like wolves through the streets, breaking down doors, dragging screaming children from their beds. The massacre had begun. It was swift, brutal, and absolute. Every male child under the age of 2 was torn from his mother's arms and slaughtered. Blood soaked the streets, and the wails of the grieving echoed through the hills. This was Herod's wrath, a king clinging to his power with the blood of innocents. But somewhere in the distance, out in the desert, Joseph, Mary, and their child fled. The sound of death was behind them, but the threat was not over. They knew Herod's reach was long, his spies everywhere. As they journeyed, the landscape turned more barren. They had only the cold, moonlit expanse of the Sinai before them, a perilous trek to Egypt, a land that held no love for Hebrews but offered the anonymity they needed. The danger was palpable, as real as the breath in their lungs. Any moment they could be caught. Joseph's mind raced with the terrifying possibilities. What if Herod's men had already spread beyond Judea, sent ahead to ambush them? What if there were eyes on them even now, waiting to strike under the cover of darkness? But they could not stop. He looked to Mary, her face pale but resolute, her arms still cradling their son, her lips murmuring soft prayers to the God who had promised them protection. Back in Jerusalem, Herod paced the stone halls of his palace like a lion in a cage. His breath came in ragged bursts, as if the weight of his sins choked him from within. His advisors, silent and afraid, knew better than to speak. In his madness, Herod saw enemies in every corner, treachery in every glance. But this child, this king of the Jews, was the enemy he could not see, could not find, and it drove him deeper into the abyss of his own fears. Herod's hands clenched the arms of his throne, his knuckles white with tension. The reports from Bethlehem were coming in. The massacre had been carried out, but there was no sign of the child. Somewhere out there, the threat still lived, a spark waiting to ignite a rebellion that could topple him from power. "Find them! I want them found, and I want them dead!" The days stretched into weeks as Joseph, Mary and Jesus pressed on through the desolate wilderness. The sand and heat were unrelenting, but even in the midst of exhaustion they clung to hope. At night they would find shelter under makeshift tents, their ears tuned to every sound, every rustle of the wind, fearing that Herod's men might find them even here. Mary's face, though lined with weariness, shone with a quiet strength. She knew deep in her heart that they were carrying more than just a child. They were carrying a promise that Herod, with all his power and cruelty, could not destroy. Every day the child grew, unaware of the death and destruction left in his wake, unaware of the lives lost to keep him safe. But the danger was ever present, an invisible shadow that followed them. Joseph remained vigilant, constantly on the lookout for signs of pursuit. There were moments when they had to hide, moments when strangers approached, their eyes cold and suspicious. And Joseph's hand would inch towards the small knife he carried, ready to defend his family if necessary. In the end, Herod's reign of terror could not last. His body, weakened by disease and paranoia, finally gave out. The man who had tried to rewrite prophecy with blood was no more. News of Herod's death spread quickly, and with it came the message Joseph had been waiting for. It was safe to return. But they would not go back to Bethlehem. The shadow of Herod still lingered in the form of his son, Archelaus, who now ruled in his father's place. They would go to Nazareth, a town in the hills, far from the political intrigue and danger of Jerusalem. Their journey was not yet over, but for the first time there was hope. The child they had protected, Jesus, had survived. Herod's attempt to erase him from history had failed, and though the world did not yet know it, the boy in Mary's arms would grow into a man who would change the world. But for now, Joseph, Mary and Jesus were safe. They had outrun death, defied a king, and survived the unrelenting desert. Their story, though marked by fear and flight, was just beginning. Herod's reign was marked by political instability and tension. He was deeply concerned about any potential threats to his throne, especially with the anticipated arrival of a Messiah who was expected to be a king. The story in Matthew serves a theological purpose, linking Jesus' birth to Old Testament prophecies and framing Jesus as the new promised king. This narrative element underscores the perceived threat Herod felt and emphasizes the fulfillment of prophecy in Jesus' life. In summary, the story of Herod's massacre of infants, as described in the Gospel of Matthew, reflects the tensions of Herod's rule and the messianic expectations of the time. While it is an important part of Christian narrative and symbolism, its historical accuracy is debated among scholars.